Good morning. On the 15th of January, for many of us, probably the first engagement of the year. Certainly, we are we are at the very beginning of what promises to be a very exciting period in South Africa's development. Just as last year was, excitement not always to be confused with positivity. I'd like to welcome everyone here to another Institute of Race Relations seminar. I'm Terence Corrigan, Projects and Publications Manager, and I'll be chairing the launch and exposition of a report by IRR Legal about racial discrimination in the police service. This is a report that will be going live a little later today. And it is particularly timely, and the date was chosen because on this day, South Africa is entering a period, or is entering a new phase in the employment equity saga. In terms of new regulations, South African firms employing more than 50 people are mandated to effectively divide up their workforce by race and gender and set out a plan for how to achieve essentially a demographically reflective mix within a number of years. In essence, these are racial quotas in all but name, and for those of us with long memories, this was something that in the 1990s we were assured was entirely off the table. Well, what does that mean? Gabriel Krause, head of IRR Legal, is going to take us through what we might see as a kind of lab experiment. This sort of thinking has been at work in the state for some time, and in the police and in the South African police service. Gabriel has been able to put together a detailed report on what this has meant, how this has unfolded over the years, and what the implications are. This, we hope, will give some sense of what the new policy for the private sector is likely to mean in practice. And without further ado, then I'm going to hand over to Gabriel Krause. And I'm going to ask him to take us through this. Anybody wishing to ask questions or make comments, please put them in the comments. We'll be having a session after the presentation to address them. Gabriel, over to you.
Terence, thank you very much. Good wishes for the new year to you and to everyone with us. I think that it is a watershed moment in South African history today. Until now, the employment side of BEE in the private sector has really been set your own targets and see what you can do to achieve them. Now, today, for the first time in the Rainbow Republic's history, private companies have had their targets set on their behalf by the Minister of Employment and Labour, Nomakosazana Meth, and they have had to report back today how they're going to meet those targets over the next year and over the next 5 years. As Terence said, the lab experiment that helps us understand how this new regime, covering at least 7.5 million workers in the formal sector, how's this new regime going to work? Well, the experiment was already played out at SAPS, which had the same kinds of targets that the minister set for the whole country, basically, since the year 2000. So this interim report is going to look into that. I must say right at the start that really the biggest kudos in a way should go to IRR Legal's lead researcher, India Lee, who really did a stellar job in getting this information that over years we've actually been trying to get in one way or another. And she found the breakthrough way to do that. And that data is really what tells the story. Okay, so just the overall agenda, context, January 15th, 2026, historical moment. We've said already why that is. We'll get into the big surprise of the research results, explain some key legal concepts to understand this, then dig into the data. This is really quite a data-heavy summary report. It's the start of the year, so maybe there's a bit of December brain, bit of silly season brain. We hope to dispel some of that brain fog and really cut through the noise with numbers. and then we'll get into the key concerns that emerge out of this. The first bit of the context is Regulation 910. Talked about it at the end of last year in our report for the IRR on the refusal to racially classified work. But just to go over it again, this is the first time that the annual EE reports, employment equity reports under the EEA Regulation 910 apply. What is the empowering legislation? It's Section 15A of the Employment Equity Act, which was amended in 2022, came into effect last year. It says the minister may, for the purpose of ensuring equitable representation at all occupational levels of the workforce, set numerical targets. And Regulation 9, so the minister is given by the law this power to set regulations. Then Regulation 9 that came into enforce in September last year, covers the duty to prepare and implement employment equity plans, which have to be done every year by all companies with more than 50 employees. And 910 specifically says a designated employer, meaning an employer with more than 50 employees, a designated employer must avoid perpetuating the overrepresentation of any group if their representation exceeds the applicable EAP in a particular occupational level. EAP, this covers 7.5 million workers, and EAP includes workers and the unemployed. It's all adults really of working age, excepting for people who've given up seeking work. So it excludes the elderly, children, and those who've given up seeking work. And yeah, today's the first day that this really covers everywhere. So we looked into SAPS, and the two big surprises are first that Black males are in absolute terms at the highest risk of suffering negative discrimination under BEE rules at SAPS. That's amazing. I don't think that if we'd asked 20,000 people what would come out of this, I don't think more than 3 of them would have said that. The second big surprise is that colored women in particular face 0 targets at top management level. In other words, the way SAPS has set their employment equity system up, there really shouldn't be any colored women who are allowed to be in top management. These are both surprises. They're also outrageous and offensive to our constitutional order. Okay, so just quickly, the perceptions. Why does this seem so surprising? Why is it such a surprise that like BEE, the biggest losers from BEE are Black men, and the most sharp, discriminated against group are colored women? Why is that such a surprise? Well, because there's a gap between perception and reality. So one way to see this gap is to look at Elon Musk, who's a former South African, who's taken some time, the richest man in the world, richest person in the world, or up there. And he's taken his time out of like running many companies to look into South Africa's situation. And here's an example of a tweet that he put out last week on his platform. South Africa now has more anti-white laws than apartheid had anti-black laws. This is deeply worrying. The goal should be no race-based laws. So the second sentence there, this is deeply wrong. The goal should be no race-based laws. That is the position of the Institute of Race Relations. It's what IRR Legal seeks to achieve. There's no complaint about that. But look at the first bit. It says South Africa now has more anti-white laws than apartheid had anti-black laws. The characterization there is of BEE as anti-white laws. Now, I think from Starlink's perspective, there's something to that, because BEE gets split into at least 3 buckets. The first bucket is employment, the second bucket is procurement, and the third bucket is investment and licensing. Now, on the licensing and investment side, there are very clear rules that say, you can't come in here and invest and get a license unless you have at least this much Black ownership. And so that really is just saying something, but is it anti-white? Even that's not really anti-white. A Nigerian company that's 100% Black is in an equal position to Starlink in terms of BEE. And I can almost see UCT campus out the window here. I know a number of Black engineers who have very explicitly been discriminated against legally because they are not classified as black. So even on the investment side, the notion that BE is anti-black isn't really accurate. And certainly on the employment side, I'm going to show it's really not accurate at all. But it is a widespread perception that BEE is anti-white. And we've got another tweet here. This one is actually the one that was last week. The previous one was at the end of last year, and it was quoting Institute of Race Relations research. So Elon Musk is paying attention to us. We're paying attention to him, and offering a polite correction. So just last week he said again, South Africa has more anti-white laws than there were anti-black laws. And again, it's just a mistake. But there is this widespread perception to think that BE is anti-white. Another sort of source that you can see that's like a real expert. These people do. They're South African think tank. They really should. Elon Musk is a CEO of companies. You might think, okay, his perception's a bit skewed. Like this Social Research Foundation, led by the former Institute IRR CEO, they should really know. But if you look at their polling reports, they say South African public opinion on BEE. They've got a report with that title. It says this report investigates the BEE policy preferences of voters. It does so via 3 different questions and gives these either-or options, which create the expectation that one of the either options is going to be a BEE policy. That's what is entailed by the investigating BEE policy preferences of voters through questions. And then they ask, the way they actually ask the questions is they say, do you want the GNU to make race-based appointment rules stricter so that only black people can be appointed? Or should we do appointments only on merit? So then you ask yourself, well, which one of these is supposed to be BEE? One of them is supposed to be BEE. Can't be the on merit thing. And so it seems like, according to the Social Research Foundation, BEE includes like only hiring black people. And so, outsiders, experts, there's this perception that's put out there that BEE is somehow like only helping black people and only harming white people at a direct effect. Second order effects can be different. So at its most extreme, the perception is that BEE means only blacks get appointed through the civil service and only black-owned companies get state tenders. The reality is that at its most extreme, BEE means only people from underrepresented race gender pairs can be appointed. And that's a big part of what the SAPS research shows. So I'm going to go through the key legal concepts, and then I'm going to go through the data, and you're going to see that this idea of BEE being anti-white and pro-black is deeply, deeply wrong. And in fact, it's anti-everyone who's in an underrepresented group, and every race gender pair is at some stage or another in an underrepresented group. But the biggest group is black men that are underrepresented. That are overrepresented. And so face these negative consequences. Okay, so the first key legal concept are the BEE goals. So it's like, I'm saying this is what BEE means. What authority do I have to say what BEE means? If someone says BEE means only black people get jobs, and someone else says BEE means everyone gets free biscuits on Sunday, like who gets to say what BEE means? Well, the BEE Act defines its goals. BEE is ultimately a system of law. So one source of authority is the law itself. And the first goal that BEE defines itself as having is having more successful black people in terms of wealth, employment, and management. The second goal is in terms of preferential procurement. We're setting that aside. We've dealt with that in many reports elsewhere. The third is investment in black-owned or managed companies. Again, that's not black generally. It's like specifically South African black. But again, we're mainly just going to set that aside because we're focusing on employment because that's the big news of the day. So the employment one specifically is achieving, and here I'm quoting directly from the BEE Act, achieving equitable representation in all occupational categories and levels in the workforce. So all occupational categories and levels in the workforce. An occupational category, we'll get into that, but that's covering a really large part of South African life. And it's not just the BEE Act, it's also the EE Act, which refers to the BEE Act, and the EEA regulations that all stipulate how to achieve equitable representation in all occupation categories and levels. So the first concept is these goals, and equitable representation is the goal. So what is equitable representation? Well, it's the it's equitable representation, as Terence said, occurs when demographics match. But just to put that in a more precise way, it's when two ratios match each other. So you've got the race gender pair in the broader population over the broader population in percentage. So something like, black men are 43% of the broader population. So the first number would be 43%. And then you've got a race gender pair at an occupational level over total workers at an occupational level. Or if black men are 50% of the workers at that level, top management, for example, then there's not equitable representation. For colored females, that's 4.1% of the population. So there would be equitable representation of middle managers if 4.1% of the middle managers were colored females. So that's the goal. And who's supposed to fit that? Well, there are 8 race gender pairs, and we've just abbreviated them: black males, colored males, Indian males, white males, black females, colored females, Indian females, white females. Those 8 race gender pairs are defined by the Employment Equity Act regulations. So the minister has said, what the groups are that have to achieve equitable representation. And there are these 8 groups. The minister has also defined 6 occupational levels: top management, senior management, middle management, skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled. So that creates a 64-element matrix. 6 times 8 is 64. And that's what that matrix looks like. You have the 6 occupational levels and the 8 race gender pairs. And so you've got these 64 elements, and all 64 elements have to match, have to have the ratios matching. So I gave you the colored female example. You go to female, colored, middle management, 4.2%. That's got to be 4.2%. And you've got to get all of these to match in order to satisfy the EEA and Regulation 910 in particular. So what do you need to do to go about getting that to match? Well, one thing is the Barnard principle, applying the Barnard principle. Constitutional Court defined that as follows: an employer may refuse to hire someone even though they are by far the best candidate on merit because their race gender pair is overrepresented or at equitable representation at the specific occupational level where the relevant job is on offer. The job can be kept vacant instead. In other words, someone can be denied a specific job because their race gender pair to pursue the equitable representation of all groups. Then the court was asked itself this very specific question: may the Barnard principle be applied against black candidates? And the court said, former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo issued this opinion, but it was, the majority of the court signed onto it. The application of the Barnard principle is not limited to white candidates. Black candidates, whether they're African people, colored people, or Indian people, are also subject to the Barnard principle. Indeed, both men and women are also subject to that principle. And again, the principle is denying someone a promotion because they're already at or over equitable representation at the level where the promotion is being sought. So Barnard circumstances occur where the Barnard principle could be applied against someone if they sought promotion. And this is what we're going to calculate. That occurs, these circumstances occur if the occupational tier above the candidate has or exceeds B equal to representation in the relevant race gender pair. So I've got an example here on this table. So African men, black men, are 43% of the population. So if that's the target, and the actual proportion of senior managers, top managers, that are black men is 50%, then they're overrepresented in the words of the Constitutional Court. And then if you have a senior manager who's a black man who's trying to seek promotion into top management, even if he is the most qualified best candidate on merit, he can be denied promotion because he's in Barnard circumstances, because his promotion would undermine the goal of equitable representation. It would violate Regulation 910. Now, that doesn't mean he has to be denied in all possible circumstances. It just means he has to be denied unless there is some attenuating circumstance. In other words, you have to pursue the goal, but you might have some excuse for not achieving the goal immediately. But to see how extreme the Barnard circumstances are, I will repeat that the Constitutional Court ruled that it's okay to keep the job empty instead of promoting this black man. So let's say he's the only candidate that applies, and he's the only candidate that's good enough for the job, and he's the best candidate, and he is good enough for the job. But it would undermine equitable representation, and it would violate Regulation 910. So if you refuse to promote him, you have to keep the job empty. The court said that's okay. So the fact that he's the only guy is not a good enough reason to necessarily overcome the Barnard circumstances. And also, you can say, well, look, we have to promote him because if we keep the job empty, that'll undermine service delivery. The court also said, if just because you think this is going to undermine service delivery, failing to promote this guy and leaving the job empty, that's not a good enough reason. If the DG wants to hit these goals, and you have to hit these goals under the law, then you must rather keep the job empty instead. So Barnard circumstances are really extreme. Okay, now let's look at the data. And the mission is we're going to try and figure out across all these 64 race gender pairs, how many people are in Barnard circumstances. In other words, how many people are in the situation where their promotion could be blocked or should be blocked under the Regulation 910 because it's going to violate equitable representation. So you need a couple of things. First, you need to look at the workforce profile. This is like, what is the actual breakdown? So we've got 184,000 officers at SAPS. We've got 18 temporary employees. From here on, we're just going to ignore those. It's very small. We're going to focus on the permanent employees, 185,000. You can see there are a few top managers, 27. 0 of them are colored Indian or white females. 0 are Indian white males or Indian males. There's 1 colored male, but other than that, everyone is black. 13 black males, 13 black females. And immediately that should set alarm bells in your head, because now that you understand how Regulation 910 works and how setting these target works, that's overrepresentation, right? And clearly there's some kind of underrepresentation as well going amongst the non-black groups. Okay, and then you have these other numbers. I think if you read the report, you can really dwell on these numbers. There's some interesting things going on here, but I'm not going to dwell on them right now. Here we have the numerical targets that SAPS has set for 2024. And immediately what stands out is you've got like 0 is the target of colored women and 0 is the target of white women. So that's what I was saying, like the way SAPS has set it up, they don't want any colored women. They've said, like, if you promote a colored woman from senior management to top management, you are actually violating you're violating SAPS's EEA plan. And that's really confusing because, for various reasons that I think we'll get into. But the basic idea is that to calculate Barnard circumstances, you're going to compare these two tables. And the first thing that you do is you just subtract the one from the other. So, every element here and here, the African male top management, you subtract the one from the other. And what do you get? And if you're getting 0, let's just look at the zeros first. That means there is equitable representation. That means, here you've got 1 colored male targeted. You've got 1 colored male in the workforce. That means you are on target. That is equitable representation. The other 2 zeros, the target is 0 for colored women and white women. And what you've got is 0. So, no white women, no colored women. According to the plan, that's perfect. Then you've got 1 and 3 here for black men and black women. And what that means is, your target is 12 black men, but you've got 13 black men. That means you're over target by 1. And the target is 10 black women, smaller target for black women than black men. And what you've got is 13 black women. So you're over target by 3 for black women. And that means that the senior managers over here that are black men and black women, if they want to get promoted into top management, they face Barnard circumstances. They can't be promoted consistent with the EE plan because their promotion would aggravate an already unsustainable situation. And so I've just explained those ones. Then the ones that are not colored in, that's where you're under target. That means you can be promoted into this position. And so, let's just look at white men and Indian men. The target is 1, and what they've got is 0. that means out of these senior managers, one white guy and one Indian guy can be promoted, and that would be consistent with the EE plan. And so then you can sort of zoom out and just look over the table, and you can see, well, sometimes white men are under target, sometimes they're over target. The same for Indian men. In fact, every group is sometimes under target and sometimes over target. Isn't that interesting? I don't know that many people would have expected that, but if you do the research and you see the numbers, again, thanks to India, you get surprised. One thing that might stand out is if you look, the biggest number here in terms of over target is this 8,000. 8,000 black men who are skilled technicians are the SAPS is over target by 8,700 here. That means semi-skilled black men who want to get promoted into skilled roles are facing a huge obstacle. And that is a big part of the story to come. So here we've calculated the actual numbers, who is in Barnard circumstances. And, amongst senior management, 650 people are in Barnard circumstances. That means their promotion faces blockage and jobs can be kept empty instead. 38 of those are white men, 38 are white women, 32 are colored women, 218 black women are in Barnard circumstances at senior management level. No white men or Indians are in Barnard circumstances. They're okay at this level. 53 colored men and 309 black men are in Barnard circumstances. And if you look again, where are the really big numbers? 31,000 semi-skilled black men are in Barnard circumstances, and 4,500 colored men, and 572 white men, and 831 white women. So you get 37,000 people who are in Barnard circumstances at the semi-skilled level. Because the way the targets have been set up, if you're semi-skilled and you want to get promoted, you'd better be an Indian woman, a colored woman, a black woman, or an Indian man. If you're in one of those four groups, your promotion is not blocked. But if you're one of the other four groups, then your promotion is blocked by Barnard circumstances. Again, you might be able to punch through that if you can show some extreme reason, but it's not even good enough to say I'm the only qualified candidate, and there are clearly going to be other qualified candidates. So I don't know how exactly you can punch through that. It's just in principle you can. Okay, so these numbers are this is just for 2024. So here what we've done is we've taken a graph that's shown you how this has changed over time. So just to go back to the 2024, in 2024, the shocking results is that 62,900, almost 63,000 people are in Barnard circumstances. That's 63,000 out of 180,000 people in SAPS. It's a third of the officers in SAPS are in this very, very uncomfortable place where their promotion can be blocked by Barnard circumstances. So here we are with that 60,000. 65,000. And here we've broken that down by race. And so you can see, half of the people in those circumstances are black men. There's some colored men, Indian men, white men, black females, colored females, Indian females, white females. Everyone. BEE doesn't just go against white people, it goes against everyone. But the most people who are in Barnard circumstances under BEE are black men. That's 2024. You can see 2023 and 2024 very similar. 2022 also quite similar. 2021, 2020. You have some changes here, but it's relatively stable until you go back to 2018, where you've got quite a significant difference. And what's going on in 2018, 2017 is that the targets were set differently. That's one of the big differences, is that the targets get tinkered. Here, also from 2015, 2016 to 2017, the targets were shifted. Makes a big change. Another big change is from 2018 to 2019. The report goes into this in detail. The number of blacks, I think it was semi-skilled officers, changed from being just under target to being just over target. And so then the underskilled officers who were looking to get into those roles suddenly go from there's an open ladder upwards to there's a glass ceiling blocking upward promotion. So partly it's demographic shifts in SAPS, and partly it is shifting targets, but it's mainly shifting targets if you look at most of the changes, and we ran a kind of statistical tester to check that. So if you just look at top managers over time, you can see what I mean about it's actually been fairly stable. So, like in 2015, there were 11 black male top managers, now there's 13. There were 8 black female, now there's 13. It hasn't changed that much. There's, it's like there's always been 1 or 2 colored men, Indian men, there was 1, and then that went down to 0. Colored men, white men, there was 1, and then that went down to 0. Colored females, 1, and then that went down to 0. Indian females, 1, and that went down to 0. White females, 1, and then that went down to 0. So you kind of have a somewhat diverse group in 2015, 2016, and eventually it becomes pretty much only black with 1 colored man. So there's a kind of shift in that, but the numbers are quite small, so it's not really, in some sense, the shift is quite small, and this just gives the same breakdown over time. You can see here's the 2015. We've got a little bit of everyone almost, and here it's sort of just black men, black women, and the 1 colored man. But what about the Barnard circumstances of the people below trying to get into that position? And here you see big shifts. And that shows you how much the targets, changing the targets, even though the demographics are staying roughly the same, the targets change in 2018, 2019, and that radically changes who faces Barnard circumstances. So black men were in trouble in the 20-teens because the targets had been set so that there were, as it were, too many black men. Then the targets were shifted to say, look, we want even more black men than the demographics of the population. So then black men are under target and more can be promoted, and the same for black females. But then just having those extra couple eventually puts those groups back over target. And similar story with middle managers. The targets were changed in the late 20-teens for black male middle managers. The percentages were changed to make it higher, from like 45% to 50%, something like that. And then black males in middle management went from being in Barnard circumstances to being okay, so now they can be promoted again. And this is kind of evidence that, like, this shifting of the targets, like, someone is seeing, oh goodness, black men are being blocked. Let's shift the target so that black men can still get promoted. But, Indian men, white men, Indian females, white females, they're still being blocked. Here, colored males are also being blocked again. Colored females are also getting blocked again. So the targets keep working. They keep changing. They keep working. Similar story for skilled officers. And the current situation is that only white men, white women, and Indian men and Indian women are in Barnard circumstances at the skilled officers level. And that's kind of interesting because that's sort of the biggest group. So those 4 race gender pairs, which are the smallest, are the ones that are being throttled at that level of SAPS. And then if you go down a level, you see here are huge numbers. The targets were set in a way, but the black male population proportions kept growing, and it went over target, and the target just couldn't be pushed any higher. So from 2017 to today, you've got tens of thousands of black men in semi-skilled roles at SAPS who face Barnard circumstances blocking their promotion. And then at the very bottom level of unskilled, the targets were often set so high that no one was in Barnard circumstances. So anyone could, in an unskilled role, any kind of, I don't know what the rank is, but sort of entry-level SAPS officer could be promoted at least a little bit without any concern about their race and gender. But that has shifted because black women are now, I think, 42% of that role and only 37% of the EAP, and so they're over target. And black women and black men are the biggest groups at risk of having promotions blocked due to BEE. So, okay, so this is the Barnard circumstances. Then you might think, well, like, has it ever been the case that that they've actually actively said, like, don't hire black people because of BEE? And we are waiting for SAPS to give us the data on that. We have requested all of the DG and sub-DG decisions based on race. But in the meantime, we've got court records to show that the Department of Correctional Services plan said specifically only whites and Indians can be appointed at one level, and at another level, no African male should be appointed. And this is to comply with the EAP. And it's under exactly the kinds of conditions that I've just shown you. So assuming SAPS has actually obeyed the law, those tens of thousands of black men and women that are in Barnard circumstances should have faced the same kind of no African male should be appointed or no African female should be appointed kind of condition. There's been a clear record of blocking black people from promotion under BEE. Again, it's a big surprise and doesn't fit the kind of perception promoted there by Elon Musk. Overall, the data shows that 40,862 Black people are in barred circumstances at SAPS in 2024. 40,862. Then there's NAIDU circumstances. That occurs where the target is zero. And the courts have said, look, if the target's zero, that's okay. And that means no one, the employer can just block anyone from that race gender pair from joining. And it doesn't count as an absolute ban. For reasons that I've discussed in a previous report that I disagree with. But the court gave those reasons. The Labour Appeal Court settled that matter. So Indian females were in NAIDU circumstances. NAIDU was the police officer who should have been promoted. She was the best available candidate, but SAPS said, look, you are an Indian woman, and our target for Indian women is zero at this level. And so if we had one Indian woman, that would be over target. So we are denying your promotion. And she fought that in court for a number of years and lost. And SAPS won. It's okay to just keep this ideal target of zero. So Indian women were targeted at zero, and then that meant 9 officers couldn't get promoted. And then Indian men had a zero target put over their names. So then 40 Indian men couldn't be promoted and 10 Indian women. Then Indian men again and white. And there was a shift from 0 Indian females to 0 white females. It's not clear why that shift was made, but that changed the total. Then it was shifted back to just 0 for Indian women for a few years. And now it's been shifted to 0 for colored women and white women. Indian women are allowed to have 1 person, but 0 for colored and white females. And so there are 67, 69, and 70, at this stage, 70 women in SAPS who can't be promoted to top management because of BEE. And that makes no sense on many levels, including the fact that, as I showed earlier, colored females are 4.2% of the EAP. And if you multiply that by the total number of jobs, the target should definitely be at least 1. So there's some kind of discretionary decision that someone has made at SAPS to say specifically, I want 0 females, and that's been enforced, and there are 0 females. So this is, I think, amazing. I think it's pretty shocking. I don't think that almost any South Africans would support BEE at SAPS in the way that it's been applied with NAIDU circumstances and Barnard circumstances. I brought this to the attention of a number of people, and I just want to talk through some of the kinds of responses, and I think that will just about bring us to a close. So one of the responses at the BEE Frank Dialogue hosted by JJ Tabane last year, where former President Katlema Motlanthe, Minister Parks Tau, and other luminaries were there, I talked about exactly these Barnard circumstances and NAIDU circumstances. We didn't have the data yet. I had no idea how prevalent it was. I thought maybe there were a couple of 100 Black men and women who were in this situation. I didn't think it was going to be tens of thousands. But I did know that there was someone, and I thought even one person being in that situation, like how can any BEE supporter, this is what the Santon this sort of convention was filled with BEE supporters. It's like, how can any supporter of BEE be satisfied with even one Black person's job being denied? So I said this immediately after my speech. The panel broke up, and 3 BEE consultants came up to me and they said, look, we're facing this January 15th deadline, which is now today, and we are dealing with anti-Black BEE. It's happening. We are actually telling companies that they have to impose anti-Black BEE because of Regulation 910 and other parts of the EEA. One of those BEE consultants who asked for his name to be kept off the record and the company he was talking about to be kept off the record said only 300 white males can be hired at one salary level of a major JSE listed company. And I actually know, I've now found the data on that company. I know what that company is. I'm not going to say it just yet. We're focusing on SAPS today, but this is really happening. Today is the first day that companies around this country are starting to promote anti-Black BEE, just as SAPS has been doing. But so, what was the response from the people on the panel? Well, we had BEE Commissioner Chiziso Montane, who said, these are just scare stories. So he didn't actually deny that they exist, and later he accepted that they do exist, but somehow just labeling them scare stories was good enough for him to dismiss them. And I think that he's right that they're scare stories. Like, they are scary stories. They're true, and they should be scary to anyone who is looking to climb the ranks of wherever they work. by merit, and they should be scary to anyone who wants to be defended by a police force that's really focused on protecting and serving the people of South Africa, rather than trying to figure out these, like, where do I really fit in? I think they should be scary to support as a BE, because the more these stories get out, I think the harder it is to be a BE supporter. Advocate Dali Mpofu actually sort of focused on the Indian zero targets. I didn't realize that at this stage it's colored females and white females who've got zero targets. I only knew about the particular court case of Naidu. And he said, well, black people suffered more than Indians during apartheid, so it's okay to say zero Indian females can actually be top managers at SAPS. And likewise, I guess he would say the same thing. Well, no colored woman, tough. You guys didn't suffer as much during apartheid as black people did, so now you must suffer more, something like that. He said there has to be a whole of society solution, which means some individuals must suffer. And then I think like the more white right response that I've gotten is like, but hold on, BE is supposed to be anti-white. So how can you say it's anti-black? Well, that's just how it works. And I think it's important to face reality. Okay, what's happened at this time is trust in SAPS has plummeted. This is Human Science Research Council surveys found trust in SAPS has really gone down. I'm not saying it's because of this. I'm just saying like SAPS hasn't been in a good position to build trust, and other factors have maybe hurt the trust. But maybe there has been a connection between BEE, specifically anti-black BEE, and trust decline. Just some possible connections. One is morale is undermined by BEE. Another is the incentive to strive for excellence is undermined, because even if you're the best candidate, literally the job can be kept empty rather than promote you. That is what the Barnard ruling says, and that can be used against anyone. Talent is chased away. So Renata Barnard and Janella Naidu both left SAPS after they lost those court cases, and they were both, by all accounts, just extraordinarily talented police officers, dedicated, just going above and beyond the call of duty to protect South Africans of all races from crime. And they just, they were so they left. So we lost that as a people. We lost their protection. And just like Commissioner Ratsecha was on the committee that actually, first year he denied Barnard promotion because he said too many white women already. But the second year he said, we've got to promote you. You're just the best candidate. You've applied 2 years in a row. No one else has caught up. Like, you've got to do this. And the court, the SCA, quoted his concern, understandable because of his rank and managerial position, that's Ratsekhatla, that the wrong signal would be sent to Barnard is not one that can be lightly discounted. Human resource management, both in the private and public sector, must be concerned about the morale and cohesion within the workforce. So the SCA said, like, actually Barnard should be promoted. And this was part of their reasoning, is that they relied on Ratsekhatla's reasoning for promoting her. And what he said, what the panel that he chaired said when they went to Jackie Celebi to say Barnard should be promoted, is they said, quote, they strongly believe that in the interest of service delivery, the candidate should be appointed. So, the fact that she wasn't appointed, the implication directly is that this is bad for service delivery, beg your pardon. And a couple of courts found that it is bad for service delivery. So, at least very reasonable South African judges of all races, all kinds of, backgrounds have found that there is actually a connection between imposing the Barnard situation and undermining service delivery. And so that might connect us back to this drop in trust in SAPS, because as service delivery goes down, so does trust. So in conclusion, SAPS has a workforce of roughly 200,000, 185,000 has been coming down. One of the first massive organizations where white people became a minority at all levels in the early 2000s was SAPS. So, BE kept going. The one thought had been, BE will phase out at that kind of point, but it kept going. And once black people became a majority in various respects, in various occupational levels, it quickly became the case that black people were overrepresented by these targets. And the constant tinkering of the targets implied that they matter, that like, okay, then someone in the EEP office is seeing that a group that they want to help is actually being hurt by the target, so they shift the target so that they can be helped again. that shows that they matter. But the constant failure in some occupational levels shows that excuses do not always apply. To not always apply the Barnard principle must have been used. So I'm not saying that the Barnard principle has been applied equally. I'm just saying it is applicable equally across all races. And overall, the decline since 2015 suggests that there are big risks for the 7.5 million workers in the country who are now under Regulation 910, which really operates in a lot of the ways that the SAPS system did. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much. Terence, back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm sure there's a great deal there that many observers would not would neither have expected, would neither be familiar with, nor would have expected. It just occurs to me, because I do have a certain advantage of age, although the more that advantage progresses, the less of an advantage it seems. That when the white paper on the transformation of the public service was published, I think it was 1995, it explicitly said transformation would be a short-term process which would ultimately give way to a sort of more meritocratic and call it value-based approach. By the end of the 1990s, that had pretty much gone out the window, and the then Labour Minister was talking about at least 3 generations, which is sort of newspeak for, well, not in anyone's lifetime. I also think that there is, I'm going to just abuse my position from the chair to address what I think is the first question here. Technically correct that BE discriminates against all races, but would the ANC really use it to discriminate against black people? I think the point is that once something is sort of encoded in a law, civil servants will often try to enforce it. In fact, I think even for the more racial nationalistically inclined, the ability to occasionally point the finger in the other direction serves as a useful demonstration of theoretical even-handedness. But I would say that there is a grave danger that certain people would try and fight this on its own, on its own logic. In other words, well, I should have got that promotion because there aren't enough white males or Indian males or whatever, which is then to accept its logic. Gabriel, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Terence. I mean, I think just a polite correction to Mike Steyn, it's not the ANC that administers the country, right? I think the ANC confuses party and state as much as it can. It likes to act as if the ANC is the government. It's a political party that places political representatives in government, and it's not even the majority party. It's certainly not the government. It's bureaucrats, it's civil servants who are the government. They are the people who administer the law, and they can break the law. I mean, we all know people break the law, but they face grave dangers if they do break that law. And they also, as Terence was saying, there's rewards to enforcing the law. And I think if you look at the JSC, if you look at the Legal Practice Council, like there have been plenty of black race nationalists who have done exactly what Terence described. They've said, like, look, we blocked Nomgcoisa Mayosi from elevation at the Legal Practice Council. She's a black woman. Our quota for black women was 1 or 2, and although she got the third most votes, she would have been the third candidate, but that was over quota, so we blocked her. And that shows how sincere we are about doing the right way. We're going to block black women when equitable representation demands it, and that shows that we're serious about what we're doing. Those are administrators. They made that decision. They made that call. Again, I showed you the evidence from court, from the DRC, of them saying no black women, no black men in these positions, and so on. There's also SAPS evidence where they said, like, we really have a desperate shortage of like Indian men and women at this level, and we have to focus on promoting them. That's in the report. You can go see it for yourself. So I think that point's important, and I think Terence addressed the other point very well. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, Terence.
Okay. Look, I'd just like to also point out that there's a mountain of evidence from around the world that demographic groups, however you want to define them, do not distribute themselves randomly, even in the most egalitarian societies. Law enforcement, even in places like Iceland and Sweden, is still largely a male occupation. In multi-ethnic societies like Malaysia, like India, there is different groups tend to gravitate towards different careers. Now, you can argue why this is, but I would say that philosophically, the policy itself is based on a false premise. There may simply come a time when very, very few Indian females, for instance, see the police as a career they want to. This may not be the sort of messaging of the good life that they receive as they grow up. Who knows? But I can tell you this: that unless an institution has a reputation for excellence, it is going to struggle to attract excellent people of whatever background. Okay, you have explained extensively the capping process. How does all this information relate to the loss to the brain drain of all races? This is so unconstitutional. From Michael Bond. Gabriel.
Yeah. So I think the brain drain point is a good one. I think that the quote that I lifted there from Commissioner Sekhatla in the SEA is the key point, right? If your morale goes down, if you don't think that your best efforts and talent are going to be rewarded, then what do? One option is that you stay where you are, and you're like, well, even if I don't work very hard, or if I work very, very hard, like that's not really going to change my outcome, because my outcome in terms of promotion is determined by other people, like if people who look like me are above me or not. And I think that in a sense, there are two ways to go to work. One way is to try and add as much value as you can in the short run, trusting that you're in a system that will then pay you well in the long run, that will reward your excellence. That's the kind of Weberian work ethic notion. The other notion is that you go to work to try and extract as much value as you can immediately. And the chaps who won the Nobel Prize in economics last year, they did a lot of research on the sort of extractive versus, I would say, like a Weber work ethic kind of mentality. And really you get very different outcomes depending on what kind of mentality you have as a worker. Now, in any population, you're going to have some people who just are moochers. They try and take as much as they can. They're not really into giving. You're always going to have kind of pseudo saints who want to give as much as they can, and they're not really worried about how much they're getting. They might think they'll be rewarded in the hereafter or something like that. But in between those two extremes, you're going to have people that are sensitive to incentives. And if the incentives are, in the long run, you really will be rewarded, then those people are going to be more like the Weber work ethic people. And if the incentives are, look, it doesn't matter what you try to do, you are going to get the same regardless, dependent on these outside factors you've got no control over, then most of those normal people will become like moochers. The one exception is people who want to be rewarded in the long run and see the system for what it is. So those with a metacognitive ability and typically the resources to match it, they will then just leave the whole situation. So, and try and find a situation that matches their value system. So, Elon Musk left South Africa to go to America. Renata Barnard and Janelle Naidu, they kind of left SAPS, work in the private sector. So there's a brain drain from the civil servants. There's also a brain drain from the country. They're both driven by that sort of middle group that sees a mismatch between their value system and the kind of value system they want to be in. And so they replace themselves. And that's really to the loss of South Africans.
I would just add to this that life in South Africa, things like crime, rising cost of living, failing state services, all are significant push factors. So people who, that skews that incentive structure. The sense that that your career is kind of on hold can make going to work in an unfamiliar environment just that much more attractive. You say, well, I may not understand the language or culture of a Bahrain or somewhere like that, but it's safe and I'll be paid well. I'm under the impression that the EAP percentage is different from one province to another, which will affect the target. Is this true?
They are different from one province to another. The correctional services matter adjudicated by the Constitutional Court found that must be relevant. In that case, coloured people in the prison system, working as wardens and so on, were facing national level targets, and they were like, okay, but in the Western Cape, we're sort of 40% of the population. Nationally, we're 10% of the population. This is creating a bizarre situation. So the way that this has been applied at SAPS is that the overall EAP reports that they've given to the government have been set at national level. And the business units that they have within SAPS are either managed directly at national level or have been basically given national level targets. So if you drill down into business unit level, there are going to be some anomalies that are even more extreme, some Barnard circumstances cases that are going to be even more extreme. And we know, for example, that in KwaZulu-Natal, where Indians are a relatively larger portion of the population, they have faced nil targets there too. So I should have emphasized this more. It's on the report and it's on the first slide. This is an interim report because we are waiting for more of the data to come out from SAPS. But yeah, once we have the rest of the data at business unit level and at salary level, there's 16 salary ranks. We will be sharing that with you as well, and you'll see it. When it comes to companies, just last point, because the idea is like look at SAPS and then see how it applies to the whole 7.5 million in the workforce. When it comes to companies, they are given some kind of ability to say like, well, are we going to match EAP nationally or provincially? And that is limited by how their businesses operate. And I think a lot of companies are going to struggle, like anything listed on the JSE, and pretty much there will be some exceptions. There'll be some companies that are very, very specifically just drawing their pools from. But anything anything that has a multi-province footprint, even if it's like predominantly in Gauteng or the West, it's like mainly a Joburg-based company, but it's got a few satellite offices. I think they're going to struggle very hard to avoid the national basis for EAP.
Yeah. Okay, we are running towards the end. I want to try and deal with the remaining questions that we have on the board now. Could employers have a value that employees are not defined by race? Is that an option? Simply say, in our company, we don't make that differentiation.
So our view at IRR Legal is that question has to be answered very seriously. It is a mistake to answer that question with a simple yes or no. The way to answer that question is by looking at the difference between the Constitution, which is the supreme law of South Africa, the Employment Equity Act, which is the governing statute, together with the BEE Act, and the EEA regulations, which are subordinate legislation. According to the EEA regulations and the EEA Act and the Basic Condition of Employment Act, there is no doubt that employers are duty-bound to report their employees by race. The reason I say this is the regulations set out that 64-element matrix that I showed, the 8 race, gender categories, the 6 occupational levels. It says you've got to fill this in. It also says, and it shows you the template, and it says you've got to fill out everything here. And it shows you the template of what you have to ask your staff. And your staff have to say they've got an option, male or female. There's no other option. There's no ignore this option. There's no I prefer do not to say option. They also have like what of the 4 official races are you? You've got to choose one of those options. And the regulations and act say that if the staff doesn't fill it out, then the employer has to fill it out, basically. So the regulations in the act are unambiguous that the employer must define their staff by race and must, insofar as it's possible, rely on their staff to self-define, and where they don't, they must second guess it.
Okay.
So the act, and that is the regulations. If you look at the Constitution, you get a different answer. Now, spoke about this for an hour last year. That was the last report that we did, and you can find that online, or you can look at the report. It's published on the Institute's website. It's called "Refusing to Racially Classified Work," and that report goes into various provisions in the Bill of Rights that show that actually employees and employers should not and cannot be forced constitutionally to racially classify themselves at work.
Okay. I think I'm going to call this the final question, and I do apologize to everybody else who's taken the opportunity, the time to write things out. But this comes from our CEO, John Endres. Can the government change the EE rules to avoid this presumably unintended outcome? In other words, change the rules to make sure BEE has no anti-black effect. Is that what the government will do when it sees these findings? What's your take on that?
Thank you, Terence. The Constitutional Court is sensitive to logic. So a logical proposition that the Constitutional Court has recognized is that if one group is overrepresented, logically that means another group is underrepresented. It follows is the word that it follows logically that the court uses. So, I think that you could try and wish for like 2 + 2 to = 7. But I don't know how you could make a law that reflects that wish. How does that apply to this? Let's say the government wanted to say, look, only black people can only be benefited and can never be harmed by BEE. Well, then what happens if, as is the case at top management level at SAPS, if 96% of the top managers are black and there's only one colored male and all of the other race gender pairs are at 0? I mean, what is supposed to happen there? Either you say, well, that's okay because BEE is only supposed to help black people and it's never supposed to harm black people. It's not supposed to help Indian and colored people or white people. You could, I guess, in principle, change the law to say that. That wouldn't be BEE anymore because it wouldn't fit with everything that BEE has been for the last 30 years in law and in practice and in what members of parliament have said and what the courts have said. They've all said BEE's goal is equitable representation. 96% black, 0% colored Indian, and so on. That is not equitable representation. So you could invent a new system, like you could call it like blacks only empowerment or something. But that would be obviously a huge departure from what exists. And I haven't heard any serious human being suggest that. And I haven't heard any serious human being suggest that that would be consistent with the Constitution. And even people like Dali Mpofu, advocate Dali Mpofu, recognize that that would not be consistent with the Constitution. So if Dali Mpofu is not with you on that kind of idea, I don't know who is with you on that kind of idea. So I don't really see that as being a realistic prospect at all. And I think, but I understand where it's coming from, Terence. And maybe because you said that'll be the last question, I can finish by saying this. It's like this research is surprising. The reason it's surprising is because there is such a prevalent idea, and I think it's particularly prevalent in like the circles that the Institute of Racial Relations moves in, and it's our duty to try and inform people where they're making mistakes. And the prevalent idea is that BEE is pro-black and anti-white. And like, if that's what you think BEE is, like you haven't been paying attention to what's going on. Like since that white paper that Terence mentioned in the 1990s, that white paper said BEE is going to be a short-term thing. And it defined various goals. And one of the goals is make more successful black people, make the workplace less discriminatory, and so on. One of the goals was achieve equitable representation. And then that goal, so from the mid-90s, this was already one of the BEE goals. That was before BEE was really a word. Then the BEE legislation came into effect in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And since then, and for the last 25 years, BEE's primary goal has always been equitable representation. I just rewatched Dr. Anthea Jeffrey's presentation from the end of last year on BEE. And the goal that she spoke about the most was equitable representation. So it's like everyone who's actually been paying close attention to the law. I think a lot of commentators don't really read the law. They just kind of assume BEE must be pro-black and anti-white. But if you read the laws and you see how they've operated, and you listen to the members of parliament that promote those laws, they all say we want equitable representation. We want what Terence called demographic matching. Now, you fail to have demographic matching if black people are at 50%, because black people are roughly 80% of the population. You also fail to have equitable representation if black people are at 100%. So the rule to achieve equitable representation, it can be done away with. If John's question is, can you remove that rule? The answer is yes. You could remove it and have a merit system. You could remove it and have some other system. But as long as that rule's in place, you have BEE. And as long as you have BEE, that rule will be in place. So I don't think there's any way around this kind of problem for the government. And there's also no way around it for private companies. Like if you are some big bank and 50% of your workforce is black female, or 50% of your senior managers are black female, the regulations are what they are. They fall under the law, which is what it is. And the law says you have to aim at equitable representation. So that's the system that we're currently stuck with. The two ways forward are either A, to get rid of it and replace it with some blacks only system that I've never heard anyone promote that was serious and that everyone agrees is unconstitutional. So that's not a really viable option. The other option is to start phasing out BEE and to say this rule, this goal, this purpose of equitable representation needs to be jettisoned. And that's IRR Legal's mission, is to jettison that purpose of BEE and in that sense, jettison BEE itself. Thank you.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to once again apologize to those who have put questions and comments that haven't been aired. We are over time now. I'd just like to like to throw a little spanner into the works here and say I'm not sure what they're going to do when you want to hire someone who's of Polynesian or Arab or Aztec extraction, or Chinese for that matter, since this is Indian, not Asian. But I imagine that there are lawyers licking their lips about the litigation possibilities for these things. But I would like to thank everyone for coming. The report itself can be found on the website of IRR Legal, irrlegal.com. If you click on the reports tab, you'll be taken directly to it. Yes, please do keep in touch. Those of you who like what you've heard, please consider supporting the IRR. And with that, we wish you a wonderful day further. And Gabriel,
can I just say one thing? Because there are more questions, if anyone wants to direct further questions to me, I'll be happy to take those.
And how would they get in touch with you?
Our contact details are on the report and on the invitation to this webinar. So, okay,
all right.
So Bali has marvelously just put them at the bottom of the tab. Thank you, Bali, and thank you, Bali.
There you go. We believe in radical transparency here. Yes, with that, we wish you a wonderful day further, and a wonderful day and a wonderful 2026. With all the challenges, but also with all the potential it holds.